The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Olivia Owens pressed her trembling hand against the worn fabric of her only dress, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days before she'd even left Boston 3 weeks ago. Camp Verde, Arizona territory stretched before her like something from a fever dream. All red dirt and sparse buildings baking under an unforgiving sun in the summer of 1883. She clutched the small carpet bag that held everything she owned, which amounted to little more than undergarments, a hairbrush, and the 2 letters from Jacob Reynolds that had convinced her to leave everything behind. The dress she wore had been her work dress back in Boston, where she'd spent 12-hour days in a textile factory, and the journey west had left it stained with dust and wrinkled beyond repair. Her Sunday dress had been stolen in Kansas City, along with most of her traveling money, leaving her with nothing but determination and the address of a man she'd never met. The driver helped her down, and she winced as her boots hit the ground, every muscle in her body aching from days of being jostled over rough terrain. A few people stopped to stare, and Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. She knew how she must look, bedraggled and poor, not at all like the respectable bride Jacob Reynolds was probably expecting. "You looking for someone, miss?" the driver asked, already hauling down her small trunk, which was even lighter than her carpet bag. "Jacob Reynolds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He owns a ranch outside town." "Reynolds, sure, I know Jake. Good man. Ranch is about 3 miles north." The driver gestured vaguely. "He usually comes to town on Saturdays for supplies." "Today's Thursday, so you might have to wait, or you could ask at the saloon if someone's heading that direction." Olivia swallowed hard. The thought of walking into a saloon alone made her stomach turn, but the alternative was waiting in the street for 2 days. She gathered her courage, picked up her bag, and turned toward the weathered building with Red Rock Saloon painted across the front. Before she could take 3 steps, a man emerged from the general store, his arms full of supplies. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn hat, and when he nearly collided with her, his blue eyes widened in surprise. "Pardon me, madam," he said, stepping back quickly. Several cans tumbled from his arms, rolling across the dusty ground. "Oh, I'm so sorry." Olivia bent to help him gather the spilled goods, and their hands touched briefly as they both reached for the same tin of beans. She pulled back as if burned. The man studied her face for a long moment, and something flickered in his expression that might have been recognition or might have been simple curiosity. "You just arrived on the stage." "Yes, I'm looking for Jacob Reynolds." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm Jacob Reynolds." Jake, to most people. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was him, the man whose letters had been so kind, so full of hopes for a fresh start and a life built together. She searched his face for disappointment but found only surprise. "I'm Olivia Owens," she said, straightening her spine despite the exhaustion that threatened to pull her down. "I know I must look a sight. My trunk was stolen in Kansas City, and this dress is all I have left. I understand if you've changed your mind about the arrangement." Jake Reynolds set down the cans he'd collected and removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. His weathered face, tanned from years under the desert sun, softened as he looked at her. "Miss Owens, Olivia, I apologize for seeming startled. I expected the stage next week, not today. And as for your dress, well, you look beautiful in anything." The words were so unexpected, so genuinely spoken, that Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back rapidly. "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Reynolds." "Jake," he corrected gently. "And I mean it." You've traveled over 1,000 miles to get here, and you're standing in front of me with your head held high despite whatever troubles you've faced. That takes courage, and courage is beautiful." He picked up the last of his supplies and gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "Let me finish loading these and I'll take you out to the ranch. You must be exhausted." As Jake loaded the supplies, Olivia noticed how efficiently he moved, how his hands, calloused and strong, handled everything with care. He wasn't what she'd expected. His letters had been eloquent but simple, written by a man who clearly had education but didn't put on airs. In person, he seemed quiet, thoughtful, and there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel seen rather than judged. "You need anything from town before we go?" Jake asked, helping her into the wagon seat. "The general store has dress fabric, and Mrs. Weber, the owner, is talented with a needle." "I don't have money for fabric," Olivia admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The thieves took everything except what I'd hidden in my boot, and I spent that on food during the journey." Jake climbed up beside her and took the reins. "The ranch account is good. We'll come back tomorrow and get you set up with whatever you need. For tonight, my sister left some things behind when she married last year. You're about her size." "You have a sister," Jake said, and his voice carried a weight that spoke of complicated history. "Martha married a banker from Prescott and moved there. We don't talk much anymore. She didn't approve of me advertising for a bride, said it was beneath our family's station." He glanced at Olivia. "My father built the ranch from nothing, and Martha got it in her head that we were somehow better than other folks. She forgot where we came from." As they drove out of Camp Verde, the landscape opened up into something that took Olivia's breath away despite her exhaustion. Red rocks jutted up from the earth like ancient monuments, and the Verde River cut through the valley, bringing life to the cottonwood trees that lined its banks. The ranch, when they reached it, was more substantial than she'd imagined. A solid adobe house with a wide porch and several outbuildings. "I run about 200 head of cattle," Jake explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "We have 3 ranch hands, Miguel, Tom, and a young fellow named Danny, who just started last month. They bunk in the building over there. I employ a woman named Rosa who comes in 3 times a week to help with cooking and cleaning, but she was here yesterday, so it will be just us until Saturday." Olivia felt a flutter of nervousness. Just the 2 of them, alone in this house. But Jake seemed to sense her discomfort. "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse with the men until we're properly married," he said quickly. "Reverend Matthews comes through Camp Verde once a month. He'll be back in 2 weeks. That is, if you still want to go through with this arrangement." "Why wouldn't I?" Olivia asked, genuinely curious. Jake looked down at his boots. "We've only exchanged letters. Now that you're here seeing me in person, you might feel differently, and I'd understand that. I'd make sure you had passage wherever you wanted to go and enough money to get started somewhere new." The offer was so sincere, so lacking in any attempt to trap her into something she didn't want, that Olivia felt her heart soften toward this quiet cowboy. "Mr. Reynolds, Jake, I came here to marry you, and unless you've changed your mind, that's still my intention." Something that might have been relief crossed Jake's face. "Then let's get you settled inside. You look ready to drop." The interior of the house was clean and simply furnished, clearly the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his surroundings. Jake showed her to a bedroom that had clearly been his sister's, with a quilt on the bed and curtains at the window. "I'll bring in your things," he said. "There's a washroom through that door, and I'll heat water for a bath if you'd like." "That would be wonderful," Olivia admitted. True to his word, Jake hauled water and heated it on the stove, filling a copper tub in the washroom. He brought in her carpet bag and trunk, and when she emerged an hour later, clean and wearing one of Martha's abandoned dresses, a simple blue calico that was only slightly too large. She found Jake in the kitchen preparing supper. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted, "but I can manage beans and cornbread, and there's some salt pork." "Let me help," Olivia said, and together they worked in the kitchen, moving around each other with the awkwardness of strangers but also with a surprising ease. Jake asked her about Boston, about her family, and she told him about growing up in an orphanage, about the factory work that had been her only option, about the loneliness that had driven her to answer his advertisement. "I'm sorry about your family," Jake said softly, "or the lack of one." "What about you?" Olivia asked. "Your letters mentioned your parents had passed, but you didn't say much else." Jake's expression darkened slightly. "My father built this ranch with his bare hands after the war. He was a Union soldier, came out west when it was still wild and dangerous. My mother died when I was 12, fever took her. My father raised Martha and me on his own. He passed 3 years ago, left the ranch to both of us. Martha took her inheritance in cash and left me the land and cattle. You must miss them." "Every day," Jake admitted. "But life moves forward whether we're ready or not." They ate their simple meal as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible. Jake told her about the ranch, about his hopes to expand the herd, about the challenges of water rights and cattle rustlers and the unpredictable market. "It's not an easy life," he said honestly. "The work is hard, and sometimes things go wrong despite your best efforts. But it's mine, ours if you stay, and there's freedom in that." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Olivia assured him. "I worked 12 hours a day in the factory, and before that, the orphanage made sure we earned our keep." "That's not what I want for you," Jake said firmly. "I want a partner, not a servant. Rosa helps because the work is more than one person should handle, and I can afford to pay her. You'll have responsibilities, of course, but I don't expect you to work yourself to exhaustion." His words, so different from the grim reality she'd known in Boston, made Olivia want to cry again. Instead, she helped him clean up the supper dishes, and when he bid her good night and headed out to the bunkhouse, she stood at the window and watched him go. This stranger who had already shown her more kindness than most people she'd known in her entire life. Sleep claimed her quickly, her body surrendering to exhaustion, but she woke early, habit from years of factory work pulling her from bed before dawn. She dressed in Martha's blue calico again, braided her hair and went to the kitchen, determined to prove her worth. She found coffee and managed to get a pot brewing, then discovered eggs and set about making breakfast. When Jake knocked on the door an hour later, looking surprised to find her awake, she had eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits waiting. "You didn't have to do this," he said, but his eyes lit up at the sight of a proper breakfast. "I wanted to," Olivia replied, "and I need to start earning my place here." "You don't have to earn anything," Jake said, but he sat down and ate with obvious appreciation. "These biscuits are better than anything I've made in years." After breakfast, Jake took her on a tour of the ranch. She met Miguel, a weathered man in his 50s who'd worked for Jake's father, Tom, a quiet man in his 30s with sharp eyes, and Danny, barely 20 and eager to prove himself. They all treated her with respect, touching their hat brims and welcoming her politely. The day was full of discoveries. Olivia learned about the cattle, about the vegetable garden that Jake had been neglecting, about the chickens that provided eggs and the challenges of living in the Arizona territory. She also learned about Jake himself, about his patience when explaining things, his gentleness with the animals, and his quiet authority with the ranch hands. That evening they sat on the porch as the heat of the day faded into the cool of night, and Jake asked her more about her life in Boston. "The orphanage was strict," Olivia said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth. We were taught to read and write, which was a blessing, but we were also taught that we were lucky to have a roof over our heads and should be grateful for any opportunity. When I turned 16, they found me a position at the textile factory. The work was mind-numbing, the same tasks over and over, and the pay was barely enough to cover a room in a boarding house and food. "Why did you decide to come west?" Jake asked. Olivia was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I was 23 years old, living in a tiny room, eating the same thin soup every night, and I realized that nothing was ever going to change. I would work at that factory until my hands gave out or my eyes went bad from the close work, and then I'd have nothing. When I saw your advertisement in the newspaper, it felt like a door opening." "Were you afraid?" Jake's voice was soft in the darkness. "Terrified," Olivia admitted. "But more afraid of staying than of leaving." Jake reached over and gently took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I know we barely know each other, but I think we could build something good here if you're willing." Olivia looked at his profile in the fading light, at the strong line of his jaw and the honesty in his eyes. "I'm willing," she said. The next morning, true to his word, Jake took her back into Camp Verde. "At the general store, Mrs. Weber," a plump woman with kind eyes, helped Olivia select fabric for 3 new dresses, practical cotton for everyday wear. "I can have one ready by Monday if you need it sooner," Mrs. Weber offered. "The others will take a week or so." "Monday would be wonderful," Olivia said gratefully. Jake also insisted on buying her a proper bonnet to protect her from the sun, new undergarments, and sturdy boots better suited to ranch life. When Olivia protested the expense, he shook his head. "You're going to be my wife," he said simply. "Let me provide for you." They stopped at the small restaurant in town for lunch, and Olivia noticed how people greeted Jake with respect and genuine friendliness. He was clearly well-liked in Camp Verde, known as an honest man and a hard worker. Over plates of beef stew, Jake told her more about the town. "It started as an army post back in the 60s, he explained. Fort Verde was established to protect settlers and the mail routes. The fort's still active, though smaller than it used to be. The town grew up around it. Most folks here are ranchers, farmers, or work at the fort in some capacity." "It seems like a good place," Olivia observed. "It is," Jake agreed. "People here look out for each other. When my father died, half the town showed up to help with the funeral and to make sure the ranch kept running until I could manage on my own." On the ride back to the ranch, Olivia felt something settling inside her, a sense that maybe she'd made the right choice after all. Jake was a good man, and while she didn't love him yet, she could see how she might come to love him, given time. The days fell into a rhythm. Olivia woke early and made breakfast, then tended the garden, which was desperately in need of attention. She weeded and watered, coaxing the struggling plants back to life. She collected eggs, prepared meals, and began learning the rhythms of ranch life. Jake worked from dawn until dusk, but he always made time to sit with her in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. On Saturday, Rosa arrived, a Mexican woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a warm smile. She looked Olivia up and down critically, then nodded. "You are the bride Jake has been waiting for," she stated rather than asked. "Good. This house needs a woman's touch, and Jake needs someone to remind him to eat properly." Rosa's presence was a relief in some ways. She showed Olivia where everything was kept, how Jake liked things done, and shared stories about the ranch and the people who worked there. "Jake is a good man," Rosa said as they kneaded bread together. "His father was hard, strict, but fair. Jake is softer, kinder. Some worry that makes him weak, but I think it makes him strong. A man who can be gentle is more powerful than one who only knows how to be hard." I'm beginning to see that, Olivia agreed. The 2 weeks before the Reverend's return passed in a blur. Olivia settled into her role, taking over the household management and working alongside Jake when she could. She learned to ride, though not well, and Jake was endlessly patient with her, never laughing when she struggled or making her feel foolish. She picked up her first dress from Mrs. Weber, a practical brown cotton that fit perfectly, and felt a surge of joy at having something new that actually belonged to her. Jake's face when he saw her in it made her cheeks flush. "You look beautiful," he said, and she was beginning to believe he truly meant it. One evening, about 10 days after her arrival, they sat on the porch as usual, and Jake was quieter than normal. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Olivia, I want you to know that you can still change your mind," he said. "The Reverend will be here in a few days, and once we're married, well, I hope you'd stay, but I don't want you to feel trapped." Olivia turned to look at him fully. "Why would I change my mind?" "Because marriage is permanent, or should be," Jake said. "And maybe you're realizing you want something different, someone different." "Jake Reynolds, are you trying to talk me out of marrying you?" Olivia asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "No," Jake said quickly. "I want to marry you more than I've wanted anything in a long time. But I want you to choose it freely." Olivia reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I choose you," she said firmly. "I choose this life, this ranch, this chance at something real. You choose me." "Every day," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single day." When Reverend Matthews arrived in Camp Verde the following Thursday, Jake and Olivia were waiting. The wedding was simple, held in the small church with Rosa, Miguel, Tom, Danny, Mrs. Weber, and a handful of townsfolk as witnesses. Olivia wore the brown dress Mrs. Weber had finished first, and Jake wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed. The vows were traditional, but when Jake said, "I do," his eyes held a promise that went beyond words. When Olivia said the same, she meant it with her whole heart. This man had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, and she was determined to build a life with him that honored that. The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle, almost chaste, but it sent warmth through Olivia's entire body. This was her husband now, her partner, her future. Back at the ranch, Rosa had prepared a special dinner, and the ranch hands joined them in celebration. Miguel played guitar, and Tom sang old songs in a surprisingly beautiful voice. Danny got a little drunk on whiskey and had to be helped to the bunkhouse, much to everyone's amusement. When the celebration ended and the guests departed, Olivia found herself alone with Jake in the house that was now truly theirs. The nervousness she'd been holding at bay all day suddenly surged forward. Jake seemed to sense her anxiety. "We don't have to rush anything," he said softly. "I meant what I said about being partners. That includes this." "I want to be your wife in every way," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just nervous. I don't have much experience with, well, any of this." Jake took her hand and led her to sit on the sofa. "Neither do I," he admitted. "I've been so focused on the ranch that I never really courted anyone, so we'll figure this out together, all right." His honesty eased her anxiety, and when he kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, Olivia felt something awaken inside her. They moved to the bedroom, and what followed was tender and a little awkward, but also sweet and full of genuine care for each other. Jake was patient, attentive to her responses, and when it was over, he held her close and stroked her hair until she fell asleep. Marriage changed things in subtle ways. Jake moved back into the main house, into the bedroom they now shared. Olivia grew more confident in her role as the ranch wife, taking on more responsibilities and making decisions about the household without always checking with Jake first. They developed routines and private jokes, And slowly, surely, the partnership Jake had spoken of began to feel like something more. About a month after the wedding, Olivia woke to the sound of shouting outside. She threw on a robe and ran to the window to see Tom racing toward the house. Jake. We got cattle missing. Rustlers hit the north pasture. Jake was already pulling on his pants, his face grim. How many head? At least 20, maybe more. Tracks head east toward the mountains. Olivia's stomach clenched with fear. She'd heard stories about rustlers, about the violence that sometimes erupted over stolen cattle. Jake, be careful, he kissed her quickly. I will. Keep the rifle loaded and stay inside until we get back. The day dragged on endlessly. Rosa arrived and tried to keep Olivia busy, but every sound made her jump. It was nearly sunset when she heard horses approaching, and she ran to the porch, relief flooding through her when she saw Jake riding in, Miguel and Tom flanking him. But the relief was short-lived. Jake's shirt was torn and bloody, and he was holding his left arm awkwardly. What happened? Olivia demanded, rushing to him as he dismounted. Got into a scrape with the rustlers, Jake said, his voice tight with pain. They were holed up in a canyon. We got most of the cattle back, and the rustlers took off, but one of them got a shot off. Bullet grazed my arm. Olivia's hands shook as she helped him inside. Rosa was already heating water and gathering supplies. Together they cleaned the wound, which was indeed just a graze but deep enough to require bandaging. You could have been killed, Olivia said, her voice breaking. But I wasn't, Jake said, reaching up to cup her face with his good hand. I'm fine, Olivia. This is part of life out here. I'm sorry it scared you. Of course it scared me, she said fiercely. You're my husband, I just found you, I'm not ready to lose you. Something shifted in Jake's expression, a dawning realization. Olivia, are you saying, I love you? She interrupted. I know it's only been a month and maybe it's too soon, but I can't help it. I love you, Jake Reynolds. Jake pulled her down for a kiss that was desperate and passionate despite his injury. I love you too, he said against her lips. I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that stage looking so determined and brave. That night, as they lay in bed with Jake's bandaged arm between them, they talked about everything. About their fears for the ranch, about their hopes for the future, about the depth of feeling that had grown between them so quickly. I was so lonely before you came, Jake admitted. I had the ranch and the work, but it felt empty. You make everything feel full, like life has color again. You gave me a home, Olivia said softly. Not just a house, but a real home, a place where I belong. The wound healed cleanly, and life returned to normal, or as normal as ranch life ever was. Summer gave way to fall, and the Arizona landscape shifted from green to gold and red. Olivia's other 2 dresses were finished, and she felt like a wealthy woman with 3 whole dresses to her name, plus Martha's hand-me-downs. She and Jake grew closer, their physical relationship deepening along with their emotional bond. Olivia discovered that she loved the way Jake's eyes darkened when he looked at her, the way his hands could be so rough with ranch work, but so gentle with her. She loved his quiet strength, his fairness with the ranch hands, the way he consulted her on decisions about the ranch. In October, Olivia realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then told Rosa, who had become something of a mother figure to her. A baby, Rosa exclaimed, her face breaking into a huge smile. This is wonderful news. When will you tell Jake? Tonight, Olivia decided, a mix of excitement and nervousness swirling in her stomach. She prepared Jake's favorite meal, a beef roast with potatoes and carrots from the garden, and made an apple pie for dessert. When he came in for supper, he looked at the spread with surprise. What's the occasion? He asked. Sit down and eat first, Olivia said, unable to stop smiling. Jake ate with obvious enjoyment, praising every dish. When they finished, Olivia took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. Jake's expression went through several stages: confusion, realization, joy, and then something like awe. "A baby? Really, really," Olivia confirmed. "Sometime in late May, I think." Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he finally released her, his eyes were wet. "I didn't dare hope," he said. "A family. A real family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Olivia continued her work around the ranch with Rosa watching over her like a protective hen. Jake became even more attentive, constantly worrying that she was doing too much. As winter set in, mild by Eastern standards but still cool enough to require fires in the evenings, they prepared the spare room as a nursery. Jake built a cradle from wood he'd been saving, working on it in the evenings by lamplight. Olivia sewed baby clothes from soft cotton, her hands creating tiny garments with love in every stitch. They spent the long winter nights talking about names, about how they would raise their child, about their dreams for the future. Christmas came, and Jake surprised her with a gift: a beautiful shawl in deep blue that he'd ordered from a catalog, and a store-bought dress in forest green that made her feel elegant despite her growing belly. "You spoil me," Olivia protested, even as she ran her hands over the soft fabric. "I want to give you the world," Jake said simply. "This is just a start." In return, she gave him a new saddle blanket she'd woven herself, working on it secretly during the days when he was out on the range, and a leather-bound journal for recording ranch business. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the valley. Olivia grew large and uncomfortable, but she'd never been happier. She loved watching Jake's face when he felt the baby kick, loved the way he talked to her belly as if their child could already hear him. In late May, on a warm evening with the scent of roses drifting through the open windows, Olivia's labor began. Rosa was summoned immediately, and Mrs. Weber came out from town, having attended many births in Camp Verde. Jake paced the porch like a caged animal, forbidden from the bedroom but unable to settle. Miguel and Tom tried to distract him with talk of ranch business, but nothing could hold his attention. The labor was long and difficult. Olivia had always known childbirth was hard, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. She clung to Rosa's hand and followed Mrs. Weber's instructions, pushing when told to push, breathing when told to breathe, and wondering if this pain would ever end. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world: a baby's cry. "It's a boy," Mrs. Weber announced, placing the squalling infant on Olivia's chest. "A strong, healthy boy." Olivia looked down at her son, his face red and scrunched, his tiny fists waving, and felt love so overwhelming it hurt. "Jake," she called out weakly. "Bring Jake." The bedroom door flew open and Jake rushed in, stopping short at the sight before him. Olivia, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket she'd made herself. "Meet your son," Olivia said softly. Jake approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the baby's face, a single tear tracked down his cheek. "He's perfect," Jake whispered. "You're both perfect. We need to name him," Olivia said. "I was thinking, if you agree, we could name him after your father." Jake looked up sharply. "My father's name was James. Are you sure?" "James Reynolds," Olivia said, testing the name. "Yes, I'm sure." James Reynolds II. They called him Jamie, and he became the center of their world. Jake was a devoted father, taking time from ranch work to spend with his son, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Jamie when he was fussy. Olivia watched him with their baby and fell even more deeply in love with her husband. The first year of Jamie's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful days. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and as he grew, it became clear he had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. On their second wedding anniversary, Jake presented Olivia with another gift, a locket with a photograph of the three of them that a traveling photographer had taken in Camp Verde. "So you always carry us with you," Jake said as he fastened it around her neck. "I don't need a locket for that," Olivia said, touching the cool metal resting against her chest. "You're both in my heart always, but I love it. Thank you." That night, after Jamie was asleep, they made love with the passion and tenderness that had become their norm, and Olivia thanked whatever fate had brought her to Camp Verde, to this man, to this life. Life continued its rhythms. The ranch prospered under Jake's management and Olivia's careful household economy. They added to the herd, built a new barn, and hired another ranch hand when Miguel's nephew arrived from Mexico looking for work. When Jamie was 2, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with joy but less surprise. They knew what to expect, and they were ready. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Olivia knew what was coming or perhaps because she had Jamie to focus on. Rosa helped mind Jamie when Olivia needed rest, and Jake juggled ranch work with being a hands-on father. In early spring of 1887, Olivia gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter this time, and when the baby girl was placed in her arms, Olivia marveled at how different she looked from Jamie. Where he had been red and angry, she was pink and peaceful, her eyes closed, her tiny mouth pursed. "She's beautiful," Jake breathed, sitting on the bed beside Olivia and touching his daughter's soft cheek. "What should we name her?" "I was thinking Rose," Olivia said. "After Rosa, who's been like a mother to me. Rose Margaret after your mother." Jake's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "My mother would have loved that. Yes, Rose Margaret Reynolds." Rosie, as they called her, was different from Jamie in every way. Where he had been active and demanding, she was calm and observant. She watched the world with serious eyes and smiled rarely but brilliantly. Jamie, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. With 2 children, the ranch house felt full in the best possible way. There was always noise, always something happening, and Jake and Olivia navigated parenthood together with the same partnership they brought to everything else. One evening, when Rosie was about 6 months old and Jamie nearly 3, they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. Olivia was mending one of Jamie's shirts that he'd torn while playing, and Jake was reviewing the ranch accounts by lamplight. "Do you ever think about that day you arrived?" Jake asked suddenly. "How you stepped off that stage with nothing but a carpet bag and a worn dress?" Olivia set down her mending. "I think about it often. I was so scared and trying so hard not to show it." "I almost didn't recognize you," Jake admitted. "Your letter had included a photograph, but it was formal and you looked so stern. In person, even exhausted and dusty, you were so much more alive than that picture suggested." "I was terrified you'd send me back," Olivia confessed. "When I saw that my dress was all I had, when I realized how poor I must look, I thought surely you'd decide I wasn't worth the trouble." Jake set down his ledger and moved to sit beside her. "Want to know what I really thought when I saw you?" "What?" "I thought this woman traveled 1,000 miles with nothing but courage and hope. This woman survived losing everything and still held her head high. This woman is exactly who I need beside me." He took her hand. "And I was right. You've made this ranch a home. You've given me children and love and a reason to work hard every day. That worn gray dress you arrived in, I'm glad you only had that one dress, because it taught me something." "What did it teach you?" that clothes and money and possessions don't make a person valuable. You were beautiful in that worn dress. You're beautiful in the dresses you wear now, and you'd be beautiful in rags or silk, because your beauty comes from who you are, not what you wear. Olivia felt tears sting her eyes. Even after 4 years together, Jake could still surprise her with his words. "You know what arriving with only one dress taught me?" she asked. "What?" "That sometimes losing everything is the beginning of gaining what really matters. I lost my belongings, but I found you. I found a home, a family, a purpose. I found love." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. I'd arrive with nothing but that gray dress 100 times over if it meant ending up here with you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. A coyote called in the distance, and somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied. These were the sounds of home now, as familiar to Olivia as her own heartbeat. As the years continued to unfold, the ranch grew more prosperous. Jake's careful management and Olivia's thrifty ways meant they were able to expand their holdings, purchasing additional grazing land from a neighbor who decided to retire and move to California. The cattle herd grew to over 400 head, and they added horses to their operation as well, breeding strong animals suited to ranch work. Jamie grew into a sturdy boy with his father's quiet determination and his mother's quick mind. He followed Jake around the ranch from the time he could walk, learning the ways of cattle and horses, absorbing his father's lessons about integrity and hard work. Rosie was more reserved, preferring to stay close to home, helping Olivia with the garden and the chickens, learning to cook and sew at Rose's knee. When Jamie was 7 and Rosie 5, Olivia found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was older now, nearly 30, and she felt every ache and pain more acutely. Jake worried constantly, insisting she rest more, taking on additional household tasks himself when Rosa wasn't there. The birth, in the winter of 1891, was difficult and frightening. For several hours, Mrs. Weber looked worried, and Rosa kept sending Tom to town to fetch the doctor. But in the end, Olivia delivered a healthy baby boy they named William Thomas Reynolds. William after no one in particular, just because they liked the name, and Thomas after Tom, who had been with them since the beginning and was more family than employee. "That's it," Jake declared as he held tiny William. "No more babies. I can't go through that again." Olivia, exhausted but relieved, agreed. 3 children felt like plenty, especially with William being such a demanding infant. He cried more than the other 2 had, ate constantly, and seemed to sleep only in brief bursts. For the first few months, Jake and Olivia were both exhausted, taking turns walking the floor with their youngest son. But gradually, William settled, and by his first birthday, he was a happy, chubby baby who laughed easily and adored his older siblings. Jamie, now 8, was patient with his baby brother, and Rosie, at 6, appointed herself William's protector. The 1890s brought changes to Camp Verde and the Arizona Territory. Talk of statehood grew louder, though it would be years yet before it became reality. The railroad expanded, making it easier to ship cattle to market, and Jake took advantage of the improved transportation to increase their profits. They were, by any measure, successful, but success didn't change who they were at their core. Jake still worked alongside his ranch hands, still sat with Olivia on the porch in the evenings, still made time for his children no matter how busy the ranch kept him. Olivia still managed the household with careful attention, still tended her garden, still found joy in the simple rhythms of ranch life. One summer evening when Jamie was 12, Rosie 10, and William 5, The family gathered on the porch after supper. The children were playing a game while Jake and Olivia watched, and Olivia found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About that first night I spent here," Olivia said. "Do you remember? I was so exhausted I could barely stand, and you heated water for a bath and made supper. I remember thinking how kind you were, how different from what I'd expected." "What had you expected?" "I don't know exactly. Someone harder, maybe, more demanding. The men I'd known in Boston were rough, crude. You were gentle." Jake reached for her hand. "My father taught me that being a man didn't mean being cruel. He said the strongest men were those who chose kindness when they could afford to be harsh. Your father was wise." "He would have loved you," Jake said. "And he would have been so proud of our children." Jamie looked up from the game. "Papa, tell us again about how Mama arrived with only one dress." It had become a family story, told and retold over the years, and the children never tired of hearing it. Jake smiled. "Your mother stepped off the stage in Camp Verde looking like she'd traveled 1,000 miles, which she had. She wore a simple gray dress that was dusty and wrinkled, and she carried one small bag. She looked up at me with the bravest eyes I'd ever seen and told me she understood if I'd changed my mind about marrying her." "But you hadn't," Rosie interjected. She knew the story by heart. "No, I hadn't. I looked at your mother and thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. So I told her the truth, that she looked beautiful in anything." "Because Mama is beautiful," William declared with a 5-year-old certainty. "Yes, she is," Jake agreed. "But I learned something important that day. True beauty isn't about fancy dresses or jewelry. It's about courage and kindness and strength of character. Your mother had all of that, and that's what made her beautiful." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. Even after all these years, Jake's words could still make her blush. "That old gray dress is still packed away in a trunk," she told the children. "Maybe someday when you're grown, you'll understand why I kept it." "I understand now," Jamie said seriously. "It reminds you of where you came from and how far you've come." "When did you get so wise?" Olivia asked her eldest son. Jamie grinned. "I learned from the best." As the sun set and the children were sent to bed, Jake and Olivia remained on the porch. It was their time, these quiet evening hours when the ranch settled and they could just be together. "I got a letter from Martha today," Jake said quietly. Olivia turned to him in surprise. Jake's sister had written only a handful of times over the years, brief notes acknowledging births but little else. "What did she say?" "Her husband died. Heart failure. She's selling their house in Prescott and wants to know if she can visit." "Of course she can visit," Olivia said immediately. "She's your sister, Jake. She's always welcome here." "I'm not sure how I feel about it," Jake admitted. "She made it clear she didn't approve of me, of my choices. She called advertising for a bride desperate and beneath us." "Maybe she's changed," Olivia suggested. "Loss has a way of shifting perspectives. And regardless of your complicated history, she's family. Let her come. If nothing else, your children should know their aunt." Martha arrived 2 weeks later, a handsome woman in her late 40s, dressed in expensive black mourning clothes. She stepped from the stage looking around Camp Verde with barely concealed distaste, but when she saw Jake waiting for her, something in her expression softened. "Brother," she said formally. "Martha," Jake replied, just as formal. Then, awkwardly, they embraced. Olivia waited by the wagon, watching the reunion with mixed feelings. This was the woman who had looked down on Jake for choosing a mail-order bride, who had taken her inheritance and left him to run the ranch alone. But she was also Jake's only living family besides his own children, and Olivia was determined to make her feel welcome. "You must be Olivia," Martha said as Jake introduced them. Her tone was neutral, giving nothing away. "Welcome to Camp Verde," Olivia said warmly. "I hope your journey was comfortable." "As comfortable as stagecoach travel ever is," Martha replied. "Which is to say, not at all." The ride to the ranch was quiet, but when they arrived and the children tumbled out to meet their aunt, Martha's reserve cracked slightly. She stared at Jamie, Rosie, and William as if seeing ghosts. "Jamie looks just like you did at that age, Jake," she said softly. "And Rosie has mother's eyes." "Would you like to hold William?" Olivia offered, lifting her youngest. "He's friendly with strangers." Martha took the boy awkwardly, as if she wasn't quite sure what to do with him, but William, true to his nature, laughed and patted her cheek, and something in Martha's face transformed. By the time they entered the house, she was smiling. Over the next few days, Martha slowly relaxed. She played with the children, helped Olivia in the kitchen despite clearly having little experience with domestic work, and spent long hours talking with Jake about their father, their childhood, and the years that had passed. One afternoon, while the children were occupied with Rosa and Jake was out checking the herd, Martha and Olivia sat together shelling peas on the porch. "I owe you an apology," Martha said abruptly. Olivia looked up in surprise. "For what?" "For judging you before I ever met you. When Jake told me he was advertising for a bride, I was horrified. I thought it was beneath him, beneath our family. I thought any woman who answered such an advertisement must be desperate or unsuitable." "I was desperate," Olivia said honestly, "but not in the way you probably imagined." "I've been watching you this week," Martha continued. "The way you run this household, the way you've raised those children, the way Jake looks at you. I was wrong about everything. You're not unsuitable. You're exactly what Jake needed, what this ranch needed." "Thank you," Olivia said quietly. "That means a great deal." Martha was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was so unhappy in my marriage. Richard was respectable, wealthy, everything father would have wanted for me. But he was cold, distant. We had no children, and I think we were both relieved by that. We had nothing in common, nothing to bind us together except social obligation." She paused. "Jake has what I always wanted. A real partnership, a loving marriage, a family. I was jealous, I think, and I let that poison my relationship with him." "It's not too late to repair it," Olivia said gently. "Jake misses you. He doesn't say so, but I can see it." Martha stayed for 3 weeks, and by the time she left, the rift between brother and sister had begun to heal. She promised to visit more regularly, and Jake promised to bring the family to Prescott once she was settled in a new, smaller house there. As they watched her stage depart, Jake put his arm around Olivia. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being gracious to her when you had every right not to be. For helping me see that family is worth fighting for." "You taught me that," Olivia said. "When I arrived here with nothing, you gave me a family. How could I not extend that same grace to your sister?" The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Jamie grew tall and strong, taking on more responsibility around the ranch and proving himself as capable as any man. Rosie blossomed into a lovely young woman with a talent for painting, capturing the beauty of the Arizona landscape in watercolors. William, the baby, grew into a mischievous boy who kept everyone on their toes with his endless energy and curiosity. Jake and Olivia aged as well, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes. But they aged together, and the love between them only deepened with time. They had weathered droughts and floods, cattle disease and fluctuating markets, the everyday challenges of raising children and running a ranch. Through it all, they had remained partners, lovers, best friends. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jake presented Olivia with a gift that made her cry. a photograph of herself from the day she'd arrived in Camp Verde. She was standing beside the stage, her carpetbag at her feet, wearing that worn gray dress, looking simultaneously terrified and determined. "Where did you get this?" she gasped. The stage driver had a camera. He took photographs of passengers sometimes. I tracked him down and bought the negative from him. I wanted you to see yourself as I saw you that day. Olivia stared at the image, hardly recognizing the thin, exhausted young woman in the photograph. She looked so young, so uncertain. "Look at everything that girl survived," Jake said softly. "Everything she endured to get here. Look at the courage in her face." "That's who I fell in love with, Olivia. That brave woman who risked everything for a chance at something better." "I found something better," Olivia said, touching the photograph gently. "I found everything." They held a celebration at the ranch, inviting everyone they'd come to know over the years. Mrs. Weber, now elderly but still sharp. Rosa and her extended family. The ranch hands, both those who'd been there from the beginning and those who'd joined later. Friends from Camp Verde and neighboring ranches. Even Martha made the journey from Prescott. As Olivia looked around at the gathering, at the children laughing and playing, at Jake talking with neighbors, at the life they'd built together, she felt overwhelming gratitude. This had all started with a desperate decision and a worn gray dress. It had led to more happiness than she'd ever imagined possible. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Jake and Olivia stood on their porch, holding each other under a canopy of stars. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day?" Jake asked. "You said I looked beautiful in anything." "You believe it now?" Olivia thought about the question. For so long she'd felt worthless, just another orphan, just another factory worker, replaceable and forgettable. But Jake had seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. "Yes," she said finally. "I believe it. Not because of how I look, but because of who I've become, because of the life we've built and the love we share. You taught me that true beauty comes from inside, from the choices we make and the love we give." Jake kissed her gently. "I learned that from you," he said. "You arrived with nothing and created everything. You took a house and made it a home. You took a lonely cowboy and gave him a family. That's real magic, Olivia." They stood together as they had thousands of times before, watching the night sky, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling, feeling the solid presence of the life they'd built around them. Somewhere in the house, one of the children stirred and called out, and Olivia went to comfort them, Jake following behind her. This was their life, built on a foundation of trust and respect that had grown into deep, abiding love. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. It was theirs. And it had all begun with a mail-order bride, a worn gray dress, and a cowboy who saw beauty where others might have seen only poverty. Who saw potential where others might have seen only desperation. Who saw love where others might have seen only a business arrangement. The ranch continued to prosper, and the family grew. Jamie eventually married a sweet girl from Prescott, bringing her home to the ranch and building a house nearby. Rosie's paintings gained recognition, and she eventually opened a small gallery in Camp Verde, though she never strayed far from the ranch and her family. William, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years exploring the West before returning home to settle down and help run the ranch. Jake and Olivia became grandparents, delighting in their grandchildren while maintaining their own deep connection. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands and talked about everything and nothing. They still looked at each other with love and wonder, grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together. As they grew old, their story became legend in Camp Verde. Young couples would point to them as an example of what marriage could be. The tale of the mail-order bride who arrived with only one dress, and the cowboy who saw her true worth was told and retold. A reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out to celebrate. There was a dance at the social hall, and despite their age, Jake and Olivia took to the floor, moving together with the ease of a lifetime of partnership. 50 years, Olivia marveled. How did we get so lucky? It wasn't luck, Jake said. It was choice. You chose to get on that stage. I chose to see you for who you really were. We chose each other every day after that. I'd choose you again, Olivia said, 1,000 times over. Only 1,000, Jake teased, 1,000,000 then. Forever. As they danced, surrounded by family and friends, by the community they'd helped build and the legacy they'd created, Olivia felt complete. The frightened young woman who'd stepped off the stage with nothing but a carpet bag and a worn dress had found everything she'd been seeking. Love, family, purpose, home. And Jake, the lonely cowboy who'd taken a chance on a mail-order bride, had found his perfect partner, the woman who'd helped him build not just a successful ranch, but a real life full of love and meaning. They lived for many more years, growing old together on the ranch they'd built, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. When Jake finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, Olivia held his hand and whispered the words he'd spoken to her on that first day. You're beautiful in anything. Olivia followed him 2 years later, joining him in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their births and deaths, but also a simple inscription that captured the essence of their love. Together in life, together in eternity. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original rooms where Jake and Olivia had lived and loved were carefully preserved. And in a glass case in what had been their bedroom, folded carefully and treated with reverence, was a simple gray cotton dress, worn and faded, a relic of the day a brave young woman arrived in Camp Verde with nothing but hope. Beside it, visitors could read the story of Jake and Olivia Reynolds, a story that began with a mail-order bride, a cowboy, and the simple but profound truth that real beauty, real worth, real love had nothing to do with possessions or appearances. It had everything to do with courage, kindness, and the choice to see the best in another person. Their story lived on, told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come when we're brave enough to risk everything for a chance at love. That sometimes, showing up with nothing but ourselves is all that's required. That sometimes, one person's willingness to look beyond the surface and see what's truly valuable can change everything. And so the legacy of the mail-order bride who arrived with only one dress, and the cowboy who saw her true beauty lived on. A love story for the ages. A testament to the power of seeing and being seen, of choosing and being chosen, of loving and being loved in return. It was a story that proved that real wealth had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the life you build, and the love you share along the way.